there are two types of fear, right? So you have innate fear, which is a fear that you're born with that you don't have really any control over. It's just encoded in your genetic structure to be afraid of these things. And then you have learned fear, which are something happened to you to make you be fearful of something, right?
What does it mean for it to be a part of our memories?
Encoding memories and things like that, have been developed within the past 10 to 15 years. So research in the, even just this, since about 2000 or so, has really come a long way in really understanding how these things work. In the early days, how they did this is they just started removing brain regions and see how that affected, behavior.
Kev Sattler is finishing his neuroscience PhD at the University of Utah. I'm very interested in the fact that Kev has degrees in not only neuroscience, but in philosophy and religious studies. What is your take on trauma itself and kind of our responses to it and how we can manage it and heal from it?
For trying to think about new like therapeutic options and things like that, to treat these trauma and fear related disorders. And when somebody has PTSD, we give them the same treatment options that are available, right? But in reality, people suffer from different types of trauma, and different types of trauma or different types of fear experiences lead to different types of changes in the brain.
What happens next in our body, right? So the brain recognizes it. What's happening overall? Where does our like conscious thinking come into play? How is that impacted, right? By once we're in a fear response. We'd love for you to take us into all of that.
The memory, and you are recalling the memory, and then your body is like telling and making decisions based on those events, right? But biologically, what's actually happening is, like I mentioned to earlier, is that your body response to a fearful situation is faster than your like visual or other cues, right? And so the main area of the brain that's responsible for that is called the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is the area of your brain that's responsible for like producing hormones, as well as like communicating with the rest of your body, right? And so there's two really important things to kind of think about when you're kind of initiating a fear response, or two systems. So you have the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. Think of the sympathetic nervous system as the gas, and the parasympathetic nervous system as the brakes, right? So when you are in this situation that is really fearful and you kind of go into this, what we call fight or flight response, that's your hypothalamus telling the rest of your body, before you're able to make the decision on fight or flight, it's getting your body ready for this. So what's happening is it's sending all this information to your adrenal glands, releasing adrenaline to prepare your body to respond however you decide that you need to respond. And then once your situation is done, obviously your body needs a way to stop all that adrenaline, from being produced, which is where the parasympathetic nervous system comes on. Like it basically will stop all of that and kind of return you back to a state of, of normalcy. And so that's kind of like the biological thing that's happening in terms of like getting you prepared, to respond appropriately.
What is a healthy way of relating with fear? If fear is not a bad thing, what would you say to all of us out there who are trying to grow in that way and encountering fear inside ourselves?
So I just want to make that clear distinction that there is a big difference between, fear disorders and, just kind of trying to overcome like normal, this normal healthy fear that we're talking about, right? And so I think if we're just going to focus on the normal healthy type of fear and kind of like overcoming and facing these types of things, let's say like public speaking, for example, right? A lot of people are afraid of public speaking. I think the first step there is to acknowledge that you have the issue, right? And once you've acknowledged, you're like, I'm having this issue, I can't really do public speaking, I'm having this like biological response, my heart rate is increasing, I'm sweating. In some extreme cases, you even have you're unable to speak, things like that. Like the first step of that is acknowledging that this is something that you need to work on, right? And that's the step that a lot of people get hung up on. And I hate to like, especially I'm about as white as you can get, but white men have a really big issue, with kind of admitting that we have these issues that we need to kind of work on and understand in order to overcome them.
How can I know that the fear that I want to work on is a good one to try to overcome? And how do I know that this fear is a good one to listen to and to help kind of shape my choices and behaviors?
If you're afraid of public speaking and you want to be doing something that involves public speaking, obviously that's something that you really need to work on. You're not going to solve the problem in the moment of having to give a public speech. But that's something that you can work on, throughout the months or years of whatever you're trying to do and accomplish. And so I think that's the biggest thing, just trying to figure out what is good for you, what's not good for you. It's just like training your brain, kind of to to realize that things aren't scary and putting it back into a context of actually encoding a memory. Memories are very flexible, and I think this is something that a lot of people don't really understand. And so memory is very flexible like this, which means if it's very flexible and most fears are learned, then you can kind of use that to your advantage, and try to retrain what you've learned to learn something new and change kind of like your mindset and the way that you think about the things.
What does it mean to be fearful of these other things, right? Like, how is it that our monkey brain that's evolved over, the tens of thousands of years, like, what's happening for it that it's responding to these, in my opinion, like non-physically threatening things in a way that's exactly the same as, being in front of a bear?
The answer to that, we don't really know, right? It's definitely something in development. There's a lot of studies happening right now trying to kind of pinpoint what the differences are between, um, you know, uh, experiences, when you are like an adolescent versus when you're an adult. A lot of people are looking at, PTSD, events versus, when you're young versus when you're an adult and things like that. But we don't really have a clear answer for that yet in terms of how your brain is making this distinction. But that's definitely, where the brain is going wrong, right? Is like somewhere in that, taking the bad events that happened to you when you were a child or something, whether you even remember them or not, whether you were bullied, that probably all comes from like a fear of like rejection, or like your parents, never gave you accolades for doing cool stuff. And, so you're like constantly fearful of, that's when you need to be a perfectionist, right? Because if you're not a perfectionist, bad things are going to happen, right? Whether you're getting spanked or, whatever, like your brain now equates non-perfection with trauma. And that's the association that you're making. You don't think you're going to die, but you do think that something bad is going to happen.